if this is actually the authentic burial shroud of Christ, which is something that both Christian people and non-Christian unbelievers have become convinced of, which I think is not a something to quickly dismiss. The fact that people, like Barry Schwartz, who was the photographer on the Stirp team, who was not a Christian, went into this with a lot of hesitation, from what I understand of his story, because he didn't want to get it mixed up in some kind of religious motivated project, and came to, after years of thinking about this and digging into it himself, came to determine that he thinks, as a non-Christian, that this is the authentic burial cloth of Christ, and others have come to that assessment as well, of course. But if that is true, what does that mean? I mean, it means a lot of things for me, but I'd like to know, like, what, and maybe we can start with you, Dale. What does this mean for you? Because this is something that, you spend a lot of time talking about. You have a lot of investment in this. You spend a lot of time on your channel talking about this. Why even talk about this? Why is this important to you? What does this mean, do you think, for this generation, really, if it can be determined that this thing really is the cloth that Christ's body was wrapped in?
Yeah, I think so. In terms of the practical importance of studying the shroud and the Shroud of Turin, there, I'm going to resort to my friend Gary Habermas. I had him on my show to debate Shroud Skeptic Hugh Ferry, and he appealed to there's 3 levels of significance, right? So, number one, the most basic thing is that it has secular historical value. Even if it's not Jesus's, or it's not a miraculous image or anything like that, this is a cloth that seems to be depicting historical crucifixion. So you can gain historical knowledge as to how crucifixions and scourgings worked in the first century, or the ancient world, since we can date the shroud to that time. The second level, if we can link it to the historical Jesus, well, then that has great sentimental, historical, theological value, because we're linking this cloth to our Lord and Savior, and it's kind of just like seeing, having contact with a historical archaeological building or something. It connects you to the past. There's something tangible and physical where we can, this covered our Lord and Savior. This is the shroud he was buried in when he died for my sins and rose from the dead. So there's great value there. But for me, by far, the most important in terms of value is about the question of image formation and the science. Can we prove that these images were formed through a miraculous process? And that, for me, is the real kicker, because if we can prove that, I've had skeptics say, "Oh, okay, let's say it did cover Jesus. Who cares? What value is that to me? I mean, people had burial shrouds. Who cares?" Well, if we can prove those images are miraculous, that's where you have to care, because that's saying Christianity is true. It's not just that the historical Jesus was real. It's that the Jesus Christ of the Gospels is real, and that Jesus was historical, and that gives us hope for eternal salvation. We can then place our faith in Christianity and Jesus for our salvation. So that by far is the most important thing, right? If we believe Christianity is true through this miraculous image, then we can repent, place our faith in Christ, the one who made those images miraculously for us, and come to a saving knowledge of God. So that's the 3 levels of value for me.
Yeah. It's kind of, at what point, like the person who might say, okay, well, maybe I'll grant that this is the authentic burial shroud of Jesus, but what does that matter? That means nothing to me. It does seem to get to this point where it comes down to, I think, the overall evidence that we have for Christianity, where I think, and just creation and the existence of God in general, where I think to those, I would maybe word it in the way of whose hearts are positioned, I guess, to maybe use more of the words like Jesus uses, where he says something to the extent of, to those who will to do my will, they will know of the teaching, whether it's from God or not. And I think in a similar fashion, that seems to be how God has kind of set up our capacity to believe and put our faith in him and the message of the gospel, that there's sufficient evidence. There's plenty of evidence to believe, but there's enough room to choose to not believe if you don't want to. And so it seems like what I find even with the shroud is it seems it comes down almost to like a heart level. And so I don't want to go too far down that road, but to a degree, I can see how it almost seems similar to the gospel in that it comes down to almost like this heart level of if it seems like if one's heart is willing to do Christ's will, is in that position of humility and openness to what God is doing, what he has done, then won't they be able to recognize that this is something God has done? Of course he did this. Of course he would have given us almost a literal photograph that tells the entire story of the gospel. Of course he would. And of course, in this age of science and skepticism, it would be now that we have the technology to uncover that, something that for centuries this cloth existed. And yes, it had great significance, but now in this age of skepticism and science, how much more significance does it have for us? It's like as if it was waiting for photography to be invented to say, hey, you guys, you're going to, I've heard it in my own life. I've heard people say, why didn't he just give us like a picture of the resurrection happening, or just a quick video image? Then I would believe, and I find myself having these sort of doubts and these questions. And so were you going to say something there, Teddy?
They won't believe that either. There are certain people that just refuse to believe, and that's part of free will. You can have the most astounding evidence, which we are given with the shroud, proof of the supernatural realm, yet even when they do know it, and Dale and I know skeptics that know the evidence as well as we do, and they still deny it, and that's part of free will. Some people do not. Some people aren't agnostics. They're not atheists. They're anti-theists. And there is no proof that's going to be good enough because they do not want to believe, or really, they don't want, they're constantly wanting to just stick it to God and to defame him, to say that he's a moral monster, things like that. And so they're going to just deny, kind of like the little, like the person is like, no, I don't hear you. There's no, a picture of the resurrection ain't going to do it either. Because actually, that's what we have with the shroud. We do have a picture of the resurrection with a supernatural camera, as Julia
right.
would say, divine photography, right there.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's. That's what we have, this thing that a lot of people would want. But I think that to affirm that the shroud is authentic and that the image on it is miraculous, that comes with a lot of baggage, if you will. And baggage is a pejorative term, and I don't mean it that way, but it comes with a lot, because to affirm that this is the authentic burial shroud of Christ, and it does seem to confirm that his body was somehow no longer in that shroud, 39 hours later or before, you have to do something that brings a person to self-reflection that I think, many of it's difficult to do. And that says something about how people are living their life. It gets very practical. What does this mean about what the choices I'm making and how I'm living and how I'm operating in this world? The shroud has something really to say about all of that, if it's true. And so that does make it something that it goes beyond just being able to look at the evidence. I think it makes it difficult to look at the evidence objectively without bias, because it does come with all of that. It comes ultimately with Christianity seems to be true. And what am I going to do with that? And so, but that's that. I guess that's a little bit of my take. But what I guess, what would you say is the significance of the shroud for you, Teddi?
I think, and you hit on something, and I've mentioned it separately myself, and so I was glad that you hit upon that and saw that as a factor as well. I think a lot of people don't want the shroud to be legitimate, but to me, the most important thing about it is that, we talk about Christianity being an evidence-based religion, and Jesus is held to that. He has given us the evidence, again, the falsifiable claim ahead of time. He's given us the evidence afterwards. There was this supernatural darkness that is witnessed by non-Christians, historians, secular historians during that time, that cannot explain, why there would be darkness in the land. It wasn't an eclipse, because you can't have one during that time of year. And so God has done so many things to tell us, hello, wake up. This is real. I'm real. Get your life in order. Do what you need to do. I'm not making you trust in me just on faith. I'm giving you compelling evidence that if you have eyes that see and ears that can hear, and do not want to run from me, but you want to come to me, I will give you all that you need. And on top of that, I will let you see what I look like. I will preserve in this world, at this day and time, we still have a piece of Jesus from his body that is with it. That blows my mind. I have not had the privilege of seeing the shroud, but I just can't even imagine how I'll be standing in the presence of Jesus's blood. I know that I will be absolutely overwhelmed. Um, but in times of crisis, again, that's when doubts can sometimes, if somebody's gets a horrible diagnosis of cancer or something like that, and they're scared. And especially if it looks like it's terminal. And they start to wonder, is God real? Is heaven real? I've been basing it just on faith, but, is it really real? And all you have to do is learn the shroud evidence, read some books, read the science, learn the chemistry. And then all you have to do is tell yourself, what's the likelihood that all of this information is wrong? It's next to impossible. I mean, I firmly believe anything's possible. So, okay, there's a little bit of but it's irrational to not think, because based on the science. God gives us that science. He gave it to us. I find some people, especially more perhaps like Protestant leaning people, they just want to shut down the shroud. And you'll frequently hear them say, I don't need the shroud. I have faith in God. My faith is secure. And, if I'm going to be really candid, and I'm going to be, I pick up a lot of pride when I hear that statement. Like, look at me. I'm just so special. I don't need proof. I'm not like doubting Thomas. I believe. But you know what? God was okay with Thomas putting his hands in the wound. And
Yeah.
God has given us this gift. And so to me, those people are just saying, I don't need to pay attention to that. it's like you're just, is that okay to just, downplay or deny a miracle? I don't think so. It's like, okay, before people know the evidence, it's one thing to be agnostic, but some people, like I said, just have this holier than that. I don't need that, and blah, 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 blah. And like, oh, well, I guess, some people need that evidence, but I don't need that. That to me is very prideful. That's a lot of hubris. And it always strikes me the wrong way when I hear that. And I'm like, you know what? This is a gift from God, and you're being an ingrate when you are not at least
Yeah.
exploring.
Is that what you Orthodox call prelist, right?
The what?
I've heard the word prelist, the sin of prelist or something, meaning arrogant pride or something like that. I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, I've encountered that reaction here and there too, a bit, and it almost seems that it bringing up the shroud, it causes like discomfort. It causes some sort of discomfort in a lot of Protestants. I don't exactly know why, but it makes them uncomfortable. It's something strange. It's new. It's almost like it's too good to be true, almost, where it causes them to want to like just kind of push it out of the way, just get it out of mind and out of sight and out of thought, because it causes like almost like they don't want to have to think about it. They don't want to have to come to a decision about it. It's too new, it's too odd, it's too strange. And so I don't know. I'm not going to pretend I understand the psychology behind that, but
they jump to
say that again.
They jump to the notion of idolatry. This is an image, and you can't worship an image.
Yes.
You know what?
Yes, right.
You're not worshiping the image. You can worship the blood that's on the image, but even forget worship. It's about appreciating what this gift is and what it tells us, that the supernatural realm is real. Because right now, the scientific evidence is that this cloth cannot be made by human hands. People say, oh, well, science doesn't prove things, it discounts it. No, 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 no. I'm a lawyer. I'm not bound by the little rules of scientists. I don't have to play by those games. I use evidence. I'm ruled and governed by evidence. And I look to see, okay, here's an argument. I'm going to look for the evidence, see if it holds up. And I use pieces of science, like lawyers do, pieces of science, you put it together and you go where the evidence leads. That's what every scientist says. So it's not that science, because people, we always hear, and lots of our own people say, well, science can't prove that God exists. And I'm like, yes, it can prove God exists. It does here. STURP science proves beyond a reasonable doubt God exists. You're piecing the information together. You are doing what lawyers call creating a circumstantial case. People think that indirect evidence, circumstantial evidence, isn't solid evidence. Baloney. Eyewitness testimony can be some of the most unreliable testimony. In a trial, a circumstantial case can be very powerful. Why? Because you're getting evidence that's coming from all sorts of directions, independent pieces of evidence that all, as we say, it weaves a web that is so tight. If it's enough to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, it weaves a web that is so tight where there's only one answer to what that points to. Now, if it points to several different things, well, that's not so great in terms of at least a trial or beyond a reasonable doubt. But with the shroud, we've got evidence coming from so many different directions, and it all points to the same thing, that Jesus was who he said he was. He told us in advance what was going to happen. The shroud proves it. You got the dark. It's just, it's an embarrassment of riches. And for people to just, the shroud, I'm not interested. That's a Catholic. No, it's not a Catholic thing. It's a thing for all of us that has been bestowed upon all of us from God. And so to ignore it, I don't think it's okay to ignore a miracle. I mean, and it's meant to provide awe. And what could be more awe inspiring than Christ's face miraculously produced on a shroud that evidences the details from the Gospels, that has his blood on? I mean, it's like, what more do people want? If people deny it, that's on them. And let them, if they manage to get up in heaven, let them answer to God as to why they, didn't appreciate such a beautiful gift, and maybe even why they sow doubt in other people about, because like I said, the shroud gives us confidence beyond a reasonable doubt that God of Christianity is real. So it's very special.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I hope that's an invitation to people, because I sense the similar frustration that I've experienced a little bit of, and just I think it's a little bit difficult, and I can kind of sympathize for people who I kind of put this stuff on, because when I first started diving into this a year ago, it became, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, like Dale, I literally listened to hours. I'm in a big remodeling project on my home, and so I would spend day after day, just entire days working. And as I'm working, I'm listening to Real Seekers and any shroud material I can get my hands on. And I'm just like in awe. I'm like, how are people not talking about this? And then you try to bring that excitement into people who really haven't given 2 seconds thought of the shroud. And they're just, and you see that immediate dismissal of it, like, I'm not, that's just, or whatever that dismissal is. And there can be a frustration, like, what do you not, you don't realize what this thing is and how significant this is, that this is earth shattering. If this is true, this is no small thing. This is what is more significant than a photograph of the resurrection, of both the crucifixion, the death, and the resurrection. They're all, that information is contained in this image, and it's kind of unbelievable, really. But I think I found the shroud in a time of, I went through the past several years of just some pretty intense doubt, and just kind of putting my Christian faith really on the table and saying, I don't know what parts of this are true. I don't know if any of it is true. But coming to the point, without the shroud's help, but prior to that, of coming to realize I am convinced, based on the evidence, that Christianity is true, and this is where I can place my faith. And so it was shortly, in that process, when I'd kind of become more settled once again in my faith, that I came upon the shroud. And so I don't think the shroud is necessary for Christian faith, but when I did encounter it, it was just this, I don't think it's overly dramatic for me to say, in many ways it was a life-changing thing to encounter, where it was like, oh, this is just, I did feel that Thomas kind of experience, just this gentle, subtle way of God giving to all of us, I think, just saying, I know for so many of you need to put your hands in my side and to touch the holes in my hand. And I'm not rebuking you for that. I'm not saying you have.
God just gave it to us.
Yes, right. And it's there. It's there for us to look at, and almost in a sense, really be able to do what Thomas did, and no longer be unbelieving, but be believing. And so I think it is a powerful thing. I think it is a powerful piece of evidence that just further supports the truthfulness of Christianity. Again, I don't think, as I think Gary Habermas and others say, you don't need the shroud you can have confidence, I think, in the truthfulness of Christianity apart from it. But man, does it add just this whole other layer, this whole other dimension of confidence and evidence to the Christian faith.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear everything you're saying. So in the first place, like I told you when you first told me about the impact of my show, that means a heck of a lot to me. That's why I do what I do. I'm so honored that I played a role in like helping you see the truth of this amazing evidence that God has given us for a miracle. That's really important to me. That's why I love seeing my measure of success. It isn't how many subscribers I've got or likes or views. I always track on my blog how many people are clicking on those sources that I give, because I give those peer papers, and I track those numbers. I'm like, okay, that's a good day. I've got 100 people clicking on this peer review paper or whatever it is. So that's for me, my measure of success. Like people are responding to it. But I hear what you're saying, like, especially in academia, man, it's so disappointing as an academic. I remember I wanted to bring the Shroud as a possible PhD dissertation and stuff like that. And, my advisor, no one's open to that. Like, there's not a chance. Even things like just, okay, well, what about how do we identify miracles? Because I think I've got a unique thing in that, in terms of applying specified complexity to miracles. And obviously I apply that theory to the Shroud of Turin or the historical evidence for the resurrection. But there's just this, I don't know, this revulsion to anything like that. And yeah, there's this automatic assumption in academia and as an academic, I'm a philosopher. So you would think there would be this hunger, this appetite, like, oh, that's new. Let's see the evidence. Let's get into it. Does it suck or is it great? And stuff. But there's no appetite.
It comes with the baggage.
Yeah. There is that baggage, and it's disappointing for me in the academic arena, let alone on a popular level. But I am thrilled that, at least on a lay level, I think the tide is turning. When you know the history of the Shroud, there seems to be throughout the 20th century, there is these on again, off again periods. I'm starting to sense that in terms of the lay level, we're starting to enter the on again period. There's this an increasing interest in the evidence. Maybe I'm crazy, but I'm getting that sense. I mean, I'm on Great Lakes Studios.
No, I agree.
Oh, sorry. I was about to compliment you, but you
sorry. Go ahead.
A knucklehead speaking about the Shroud on the amazing Great Light Studios. That's pretty great there.
Yes. Well, I was going to say, I think you're right that there is probably a shift in that, and I think YouTube and platforms like YouTube are probably responsible for that, just because of the easy accessibility of the information now, and that has just dramatically changed in the last decade or so, that people can just have conversations like this. And now who knows how many people are now able to sit and listen in and be introduced to the Shroud in ways that they would have never been able to before. Like, how many people are going to see a magazine about the Shroud at the grocery store on a tabloid or something and say, hey, that's something I think I'm going to go home or go to my local library and do a deep dive on. I mean, it's just so much more accessible now for people to be introduced to the evidence that there really is. And I think that is probably a contributing factor to, I think there is probably, in a sense, a shifting of the mindset about it, where I hope it will more and more become less of this thing that is just quickly and immediately dismissed as just this strange, obscure, quote unquote Catholic relic that people just have no interest in investigating, because I think there's no substance to it. I think that slowly that is going to change, and this will be something that is just seen for what it is, something that you have to, in a sense, come to a decision about. Like, this, here it is. Scholars mostly agree that this is likely authentic. What do you do with that?
And more than that, maybe even spur future testing. Come on, let's put the pressure on this Pope. Change his mind. Maybe.
Yes, right.
Awesome, yeah. Thank you so much. Like I said, I really am honored that you brought me and Teddy on to speak about the Shroud and stuff like that.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes, well, I'm honored that you guys joined me, and thank you for sticking around the 4-hour mark. I'm pretty well known in a lot of my videos that once I get going, I have a hard time stopping, and so I'm not new to 4-hour videos, but I always feel a little bad when Okay, yeah.
No,
Yeah. I've listened to enough of your shows that I figured you guys would be fairly comfortable with a longer one. So,
I have told Dale repeatedly, and I've told some other people repeatedly, these 1 hour shows, it's like just as I'm starting to get to the good stuff, it's like, oh, we've got to rack, but I'm like, you can't really do much, especially with the shroud. There's so much there's so much more evidence that we haven't even gotten into, um, and the more you dig, the more fascinating it becomes. And
yeah.
but yeah, I've told Dale, it's like you can't even when like on Skeptics and Seekers when we were on there, and we would debate different topics. I noticed a trend that you really can't have a good discussion on a topic unless it's about 4 hours. At least a good, and usually, you can get a lot done in 4 hours, but the ones that are shorter than that, it just kind of scratching the surface, and they're sort of shallow. And one thing I want to encourage people about. So I'm not a scientist. I don't like science. In terms of like being science oriented. No, I'm not that. But I am interested in evidence for God's existence beyond a reasonable doubt. That fascinates me. And so people don't be shy or even lazy about get in and learn. If I can't tell you how many times to understand, I might look like I've got a good command of a lot of this. I had to read it over and over and over again for stuff to really start to sink in and gel. It doesn't just happen overnight. Read it, read stuff, read papers. Shroud.com is, you know, it's the place to go. It's the biggest database for information about the shroud. It's all free. It's like read papers, especially the papers written by Stirp, which it'll show the Stirp papers up top. Um, Read it. Yeah, you know what? It's not going to be fun reading it. It's going to be hard reading it. And when you read it a second and third time, it's going to be hard unless you're a science or unless you're just oriented towards that. But do you want to have the kind of unshakable confidence in God's existence? If you want that, then, put some effort into it. And you know what? The reward will just surpass your expectations. It's worth putting in the time. It didn't all have to be done in a day. And honestly, the easiest way to do it now with YouTube, listen to a bunch of debates. Dale and I, we've had lots of talks. Dale's had talks with other Shroud scholars. I mean, it's so easy now. You can, be multitasking. You can be in your car. You can be getting ready in the morning. You can be washing dishes, listening to things. Then listen to it again. Listen to it several times. Let the information seep in. But if you ever hit a time of crisis, and most people will, having confidence beyond a reasonable doubt, I'll tell you, there's no substitute for that.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. I found myself multiple times, even when anxiety about, am I going to suddenly discover I have cancer, or the what ifs, when you see these things happening in other people, it can sometimes cause some self-reflection there and make you re-recognize your own mortality. And I found my mind going back to the image of the face of the shroud, and it's as if it's just this deep inward comfort of that would be okay. And Jesus, as he said, because I live, you also will live. And that's what one of the many things I guess I see being said, being like communicated in the image in the shroud, is it's saying something about death itself. And it's telling us that this, where, O death, is your sting? I when I look at the shroud, that's just, some of the things that I feel like it's saying in that image. It's speaking that reality, that death itself, the power has been overcome. And this man rose again. He resurrected. He somehow was no longer in that shroud where he was before. And so it kind of has been that sort of comfort to me as well, where the fear of death can be kind of quieted down just from what is being communicated there in that image. So again, I just think it's something that is worth considering. It's worth any Christian, any believer doing more than giving that quick dismissal for whatever the motivation, the many different motivations might be behind immediately dismissing that. I think it's very much worth, because it is a gift. I think it's something it's blessed my life in many ways. And I think it'll bless other people who are just willing to give it a fair hearing and a fair consideration.
Yeah. I had a dear friend of mine. He was an elderly gentleman, and I had known him for probably at least 15 years. And one day we got into a discussion, and I found out he was an agnostic. Now, he grew up as a Christian, in a Christian household, but he, real sharp fellow and very critical thinker. And he was like Doubting Thomas. He needed strong scientific evidence that God was real. He didn't have any animosity towards God or the thought of God. He was certainly not an anti-theist, but he needed strong evidence in order to get on board with the program. And as soon as I found out about it, I asked him, I said, have you ever heard about the Shroud of Turin? And he didn't. And of course, then, I get on a tear for about 2 weeks. I bombard him through emails with sending him some particular Shroud papers and highlighting certain information. And in about 2 weeks with these things, because like I said, he had a truly open mind. He ended up coming to Christ with the Shroud evidence. And there are many people, many atheists, agnostics, who have come to Christ. So it's important for the non-believers to help bring them to Christ. We have many Shroud scholars who used to be non-believers and who are now believers and Shroud scholars. But it's also a blessing in the lives of Christians, because we don't have to just have faith in God's existence. We can have knowledge of that. And all it requires is just the tiniest bit of faith on top of a mountain of knowledge. But I mean, when you start to really know the evidence, you see the absurdity of the Shroud being anything other than what it obviously is. So, even the people way back when could tell it was an image not made by human hands. So if they could tell, come on, as Biden would say, come on, man.
How much more should we be able to tell? Yes.